Welcome back as we come to chapter 16 of the Screwtape letters. Screwtape writes to Wormwood, "You mentioned casually in your last letter that the patient has continued to attend one church and one only since he was converted, and that he is not wholly pleased with it." He then goes on to give the advice, "Surely you know that if a man can't be cured of church-going, the next best thing is to send him all over the neighborhood looking for a church that suits him until he becomes a taster or connoisseur of churches." Let's say it strikes me that this is one of the great aspects of the Catholic Church, of what our parish system, that really does make it so that, in general, yes, there can be cases of certain churches having certain stresses or ways that they do things, but for the most part, a parish church is defined by territory. So all those who live in the particular territory belong to that parish. It doesn't matter what your race is, it doesn't matter what your political party is, all of them come together, typically in one spot. And so, for the most part, like I said, there's going to be some slight accents to what one parish is versus another, but for the most part, as Catholics, when we gather together, we go to a parish, and this parish is going to be very much like the next parish. Again, not exactly, a lot of times it depends more on the pastor than on the people, but again, you'll just find that there's a whole conglomeration of people, that it isn't just this one particular group. You're not going to find one particular political party or one particular way of belief, typically here in the Catholic Church. Wormwood is told, in the first place, parochial organizations should always be attacked because, being a unity of place and not of likings, it brings people of different classes and psychology together in the kind of unity that the enemy desires. Just what I was just saying. All kinds of people are brought together in one place, all doing the same thing. Different people doing the same thing together. That kind of unity that really goes against what the devil would like us to do. The devil always wants to divide. He wants to split off. He wants to establish factions and fractions, but we don't allow that. He says the congregational principle, on the other hand, makes each church into a kind of club, and finally, if all goes well, into a coterie or faction. Again, if you start to think of, well, this is our church and we do this here, unlike everybody else, it starts to get that idea that this is strictly what we do, and you don't look and see, how do we belong to the wider church? Now again, I admit that most of the time when we're hearing about it in the Screwtape letters, we're hearing in reference to the Church of England, but we can make those parallels to the Catholic Church as well. It says in the second place, the search for a suitable church makes him a critic where the enemy wants a pupil. He goes on, what he wants, God, is the layman in church with an attitude which may indeed be critical in the sense of rejecting what is false or unhelpful, but which is wholly uncritical in the sense that it does not appraise, nor does it waste time in thinking about what it rejects, but lays itself open, uncommenting, humbly receptive to any nourishment that is going on. If you go in and say, well, this is the only thing I'm willing to learn today, or if it doesn't fit this particular category, then I'm not going to listen, versus going in and saying, I'm open to whatever God is going to be speaking today. It might be something that I wasn't expecting. It might not be something that I was wanting. But again, I'm willing to be surprised. That is what God is wanting for us. Willingness to go in and be receptive, to receive something. Again, we talk about the nourishment. It may be cheese and cracker. It might not be the steak dinner that week. But again, at least we're open to receiving something. As explained, this attitude, especially during sermons, creates the condition, most hostile to our whole policy, in which platitudes can become really audible to the human soul. There's hardly any sermon or any book which may not be dangerous to us if it is received in this temper. Again, that idea of just openness. What can I learn from this? What is it that's going to speak to me in a particular way? Screwtape says, the two churches nearest to him I've looked up in the office. Both have certain claims. At the first of these is the vicar, is a man who has been so long engaged in watering down the faith to make it easier for a supposedly incredulous and hard-headed congregation that he now who shocks the parishioners with his unbelief, and not vice versa. Again, we have to avoid the attitude of, okay, all I'm going to give people because they're not really moved along, they really don't fully understand, we're just going to give them baby food all the time. Every once in a while, you got to feed them steak. You got to give some people something to truly think about. If you're just thinking, well, most of these people don't know too much about their faith, and so therefore, I'm not going to tell them anything about their faith. I'm not going to try to teach them anything that to move on because they don't have the basics. Well, they don't learn anything. There's no movement. We talk about his conduct of service is also admirable. In order to spare the laity all difficulties, he has deserted both the lectionary and the appointed psalms, and now, without noticing it, revolves endlessly around the little treadmill of his 15 favorite psalms and 20 favorite lessons. We are thus safe from the danger that any truth that is not already familiar to him and his flock should ever reach them through the scriptures. That's the great thing about the scriptures. That's why I really enjoy preaching. Every time I read those scriptures, I may have seen the scripture multiple times. You figure most Sunday Gospels I'm seeing or every 3 years, for the last now going on 27 years. I've been through this 9 times, plus 9 years in the seminary. But I'm always surprised at, I don't preach the same homily every year. Something new jumps out at me. God always surprises with the truths that he's going to give us. Then we're told about another option. The other church we have, Father Spike. The humans are often puzzled to understand the range of his opinions. Why one day he is almost a communist, and the next not far from some kind of theocratic fascism. One day he is a scholastic, by that we not just meaning study, but kind of following the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas, who always told us that faith and reason are not contradictory, but are able to work together. And then the next prepared to deny human reason altogether. We were told, the man cannot bring himself to preach anything which is not calculated to shock, grieve, puzzle, or humiliate his parents and their friends. It strikes me that there's a great line one time I heard on what the role, especially of a homily, of a sermon, is supposed to be. It's to comfort those who are upset and to upset those who are comfortable. It should be able to do both those things. It's not just meant to shock. It's not just meant to, for the sake of shocking people. It's also meant to help people along the way, those who are struggling, those who have challenges, to help them as they go along. We hear there's also a promising streak of dishonesty in him. We are teaching to say, the teaching of the church is, when he means really, I am most certainly sure that I read recently in Maritain or someone of that sort, again, he read in a book somewhere, again, the idea that somebody's opinion is equal to church teaching. I think we run into that all the time, especially if you're on the internet. And God forbid you go into the dredge of the comment sections on things about the Catholic Church. People say, well, I believe, or this is the way, I believe this is to be true. Well, you know what? The church knows what it believes. Again, we have the catechism to be able to guide us. It's not just a matter of looking at, saying, well, I believe this to be true, so it is. We do have some authority that tells us, this is the bottom line, this is true, this isn't. The teaching of the church is not up to popular opinion. I don't care much about polls that might tell us. The vast majority of people, for example, believe that maybe women should be ordained or abortion is okay or anything like that. I look at those things and say, this isn't something that we take a poll on. That's not how our faith is decided. Our faith is based on what is handed down through Scripture and tradition, as especially given to the church for that interpretation. So the church is the one that makes those decisions, not each and every one of us. Screwtape says, the real fun is working up hatred between those who say Mass and those who say Holy Communion, when neither party could possibly state the difference between, say, Hooker's doctrine and Thomas Aquinas's. Again, this is kind of one of those inside baseball comments for the Church of England. They talk about having the high church and the low church. High church would be a whole lot of what we would call smells and bells, incense, things like that. They believe that, in what they would see as Holy Communion, where another side is very much more of what we consider the typical Protestant, not too concerned with, the externals. Let's talk about the Scripture. Let's talk about things like that instead. And so all those exist within the Church of England, and sometimes there's a fight between the high party and the low party over who's right. But ultimately, we are told, Paul used to teach about food and other unessentials, namely that the human without scruples should always give in to the human with scruples. If it doesn't make any difference to us one way or another, then we should be careful not to scandalize somebody who it does. The example that is being used is Paul talking about meat sacrificed to idols. Some people would say, you know what, the idol really doesn't exist, so it's perfectly okay to eat this. But some other people would say, but that was sacrificed to an idol. That's given to a fake God that isn't our God. So this isn't something you should eat. Paul just says, if there's any doubt, you're better off to do without. So again, if there's any questions, feel free to email me at my parish email address, and I'll answer the questions, hopefully in the future, but again, I haven't gotten too many of them so far, but I may just email you back with an answer.